You are listening to Viewpoints from PlaceCloud. Cultural researchers tell stories of places from around the world. For the full multimedia experience and to support the creators you enjoy, visit placecloud.io.
One of the earliest documented pirates to use a wooden leg was Cornelis Jol. Technically, Jol was an admiral in the Dutch West India Company, which highlights the dualist nature of particularly the earlier Dutch colonial adventure, as Jol's specialty was raiding Spanish and Portuguese fleets, gathering large amounts of loot in the process. The Spanish also called him El Pirata, but it was his prominent physical feature that christened him foremost. For the Dutch, he was Houtebeen, for the Portuguese, Perna de Pau, and for the Spanish, Patapalo, all literally meaning peg leg. The Spanish, demonizing the men for their defeat at his onslaughts, sang a song about peg leg, which started Patapalo es un pirate malo que come pulpo crudo y bebe agua del mar, meaning Pegleg is a bad pirate who eats raw octopus and drinks seawater. Jol hailed from Scheveningen, essentially the beach at The Hague, and joined the West India Company in 1626. He quickly climbed the ranks and was a popular commander, crossing the Atlantic an impressive 9 times between his enlisting and his untimely death in 1641. Already in 1629, he brought success to the Dutch in what is modern-day Brazil. In that year, he captured the island of Fernando de Noronha off the Brazilian coast, some 500 kilometers from Recife, and the island remained part of Dutch Brazil until 1654 under the name of Pavonia, named after the man who the island had been leased to, Michiel de Pauw. Under Pauw, the island was a destination for individuals banished from Pernambuco, both first under the Portuguese and then also under the Dutch. It was Maurice de Nassau who gave Cornelis Jol the command over 21 ships and 2,145 soldiers in May 1641 to sail to the coast of Africa, where he was to take control from the Portuguese of the city of Luanda in Angola and later the island of São Tomé. This African adventure didn't bring São Tomé under Dutch control for the first time. In 1599, still finding their footing as colonizers and pirates, they also briefly had occupied the island. After the establishment of the Iberian Union, the Spanish crown, sour from the Dutch attempting to throw off the yoke of Spanish colonial control, had barred Dutch trade from their colonies. But instead of this throwing a spanner in the works, the Dutch instead first reverted to piracy, successfully and slowly gained control of more and more of the overseas trade, laying the groundwork for a man like Jol himself. In 1596, the Dutch had started to control parts of the trade along the Gulf of Guinea, but had failed to take the fort of São Jorge de Mina in modern-day Ghana. Instead, they headed further down the coast and managed to take Príncipe, São Tomé's sister island, from the Portuguese, even if they had to retreat after 3 months, unprepared for the rain, the marshes, and malaria they all suffered from. But undeterred, the year after, the Dutch came back, now not with 5, but with some 40 ships, and on October 18, 1599, quickly took control of São Tomé. But only for a few days, as they had learned little from their previous expedition and were again surprised by heavy rains and disease, an impressive 1,200 men dying in just a few days before retreating. So after Cornelis Jol had managed to secure Luanda for his compatriots, perhaps he felt the Dutch still had a score to settle in São Tomé. Almost exactly 42 years later, on October 16, 1641, he led a party that took control of Fort São Sebastião in São Tomé. Now, decades later, the Dutch were better prepared, and they managed to stay until the Portuguese recaptured the fort on December 15, 1644. However, Jol was less well prepared. Legend had it that when the Portuguese had arrived in 1470 and found no inhabitants, some of them had been eaten by giant lizards. Jol didn't meet his end at the paws of a monitor lizard, if that was what they were, but he did die of malaria just 2 weeks after arriving on October 31. He really should have known better. 3 statues now guard the entrance to the fort, reimagined as the National Museum. The statues represent the Portuguese who discovered the islands, even if some contest whether they were uninhabited when the Portuguese arrived. The statues, of course, are leftovers from before independence. More fitting as a memory of the history of the island and the Portuguese and Dutch exploitation of the island is the legacy of Rei Amador, who oversaw a slave revolt and briefly controlled the island in 1595 and 1596, and who is commemorated with a large statue just a few blocks away, and was featured on the country's currency, as well as on Cape Verdean money, another former Portuguese colony. History perhaps doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. Martin Jol, a well-known Dutch soccer coach who led Tottenham Hotspur, as well as the most successful Dutch soccer team Ajax, and the Egyptian team Al Ahly, is a direct descendant of Cornelis Jol, but also failed to conquer African hearts and minds, as he was expelled from the job at his Egyptian team within 6 months of first arriving. Short stays on the African continent seem to run in his family.